Hey everyone, Travis here at the Riot headquarters this time for an interview with Nick Allen. He's an esports manager, a good friend of mine, sometimes an enemy. How's it going, Nick?
Always an enemy.
Always an enemy.
It's going well, man. It's going well.
Since you've said that, let's start off with some questions. No, actually, I'd love to talk to you about the Coke Zero League. Actually, it's not actually called the Coke Zero League, which is maybe the best way to start this off.
Yeah.
So Coke, you guys announced we're going to be coming in to sponsor with the Coke Zero brand, the Challenger League. A lot of people have referred to it as the Coke Zero League. Yeah. It's become clear that it's not actually a title sponsor. So what exactly is Coke Zero's involvement with the Challenger League?
Yeah, so Coke approached us and said that they wanted to get involved in competitive League of Legends of some way. But they didn't want to go in like the traditional route of like maybe like a traditional sponsorship or something like that. So they wanted to do something to fill a void in the community. And we saw a big hole in the Challenger level of play. And so we recommended them, like, this would be the best way to serve the community, get involved, and satisfy a need. And so through that, we talked and came up with a lot of different ideas and eventually landed on like, the format and the system that is the Challenger Series and how it feeds directly into the LCS. And you mentioned like the naming rights and that sort of thing, but one of the key components when we talked to Coke was making a league that's sustainable and stands on its own and has its own unique identity. Those were all key important goals for the Challenger Series. So having its own unique name, independent of other brands, was what we moved forward with as a primary goal.
Sure, and so just sort of narrowing in on it, you know, we see the Coke Zero logo, I believe, on the LCS stream.
Yeah.
So what is really the difference between Coke Zero's participation in the Challenger League as opposed to the LCS?
Yeah, so specifically Coke approached us and wanted to fill that void, right? And but more than that, they wanted to get involved at a high level of just what we're doing. And so it encompassed both LCS and Challenger. So they are more focused on the Challenger Series itself, but they are really pleased to be helping out and participating with the LCS.
So obviously this Challenger Series is helping out the Challenger scene. A lot of people had concerns about the situation that occurred in 2013 where you had the LCS and then you didn't really have so much below, and so a lot of these other teams struggled. Do you think that the Challenger Series has answered and solved a lot of the problems that people felt existed in 2013, and maybe all of them, you know, or do you think you have more work to do there?
It definitely didn't solve all the problems. I'm not sure we know what all the problems are. I don't think we've been able to identify that. But some of the key things that some key holes that were in the Challenger scene specifically were like regularity in schedule and visibility. And those are two things that the Challenger Series is really doing. Consistently, there are matches after the LCS, and consistently there is a substantial amount of viewership, considerably more than we expected actually when we put this thing together. So the viewership's been awesome, and really it's been able to fill those two holes, but it doesn't necessarily solve everything.
Now, right out the gate, we saw sort of a return to a lot of the issues that we saw back in 2012 when there were a lot of online tournaments, namely DDoSing as being a situation. We saw a team that was forfeited a match, I believe, because of that. What did you guys, like, I'm sure you can't speak to the specific technologies or whatever involved in this, but do you guys work with the teams, and if so, sort of how to prevent these kind of things? Yeah,
we created a DDoS prevention guide, is one of the key components of helping to prevent against DDoS, and we give it to all the different teams, and we walk them through it, and we double and triple check, for the most part, to make sure that they are actively using this DDoS protection. DDoS is a big problem, and we are doing our best within the means that we have to help and to educate these players and equip them specifically with the protection necessary to not get DDoSed.
And even despite all that, you know, obviously stuff will still get through. I mean, it seems to have just been an issue that's always plagued esports organizations and players and that kind of thing. Do you know, how does the format and maybe the rule set help to tie into this? And some, like along the same lines, the community, I think, has had some concerns that maybe the rules are too strict and don't really allow for situations where people are being victims. So really, how have you guys addressed this, and do you think that it's fine in its current state?
This is a really challenging
no pun
issue.
intended.
Yeah, well, appreciate that.
Always here for you.
Really challenging. And we have come forward and communicated our stance on the policies, which have been met with mixed criticism. But mainly, like, just from my personal approach to like running tournaments and my experience, and working with a lot of DDoSes that were big in like late 2012 as IPL was running all these different tournaments. What we were seeing was we would run a match and it would get a DDoS, and so we would reschedule and then we would run that match the next week, and then that match would get DDoSed, and so we would be rescheduling. So literally the tournament as a whole is getting bottlenecked by this match that can't be completed because of one player, multiple players getting DDoSed and attacked in this way, and despite all of our best efforts to educate and train in these matters, we couldn't guarantee that this wasn't going to happen. So in the end, we had to put the ownership and the responsibility on the player to defend themselves because we weren't able to do it. In an effort to not bottleneck and slow down the tournament, especially now that Challenger has implications on LCS as a whole, right? We can't slow the tournament down, and it really falls on the personal responsibility of the player. And I know that's a pretty somewhat unpopular stance on the issue, but just through personal experience and the need to move these tournaments along and not being at the power of like rescheduling based on DDoS, we had to be pretty firm in our approach on this. And it is really unfortunate, but that's just based on our experience of running these tournaments and seeing like, unless we go this route, we could literally affect the system as a whole because of these attacks. And so it is challenging.
So it's kind of like the best answer to an unfortunate situation, really. There was also some concerns about the way that teams make it in through the ranked system, the ranked league system. We've seen both in solo queue and in team situations, situations where teams camp the system or the rank system to camp spots. Do you think that that's a concern going into, using that as a way to get into the Challenger system?
Yeah, that is a good question. And we did see some issues related to that at the end of this last season as people are trying to get rewards. Right. And we did have a response to that, right? We actually rewarded the top 50 MMR players along with the top players in Challenger. Right. So we did take some solutions. What we actually found was when we did that and we covered the MMR players and the people in the league specifically, it was a very, very, very similar pool of players. It was actually a very small variation. So we do have some things in place regarding that to help combat that. But as regards to the Challenger Series and qualification, that issue really only affects the bottom aspect of the Challenger League for the most part. And so since teams are in North America fighting for the top 20 spots and in Europe for the top 10 on EU West and EU Nordic, they actually aren't, they're very, very, very rarely affected by that sort of issue at the bottom of Challenger. So we actually haven't run into that problem. But if something like that happened and it required us to step in, we definitely would. We would acknowledge if a system isn't working or something like that, and we would make changes appropriately.
Sort of the final question about the Challenger Series is what lessons have you guys learned already? It's been running for almost a month now, I think. So.
Yeah. That's also a good question. We tried to take a lot from the LCS and carry that over to the Challenger League, Challenger Series, and that just doesn't work really. A lot of the things around like broadcast and locking 5 players, so the day before, which you can find in our rule set, to ensure that the broadcast is able to do stories and graphics and all this stuff, and really make the experience and the viewing experience really pleasurable and really detailed and all this really cool stuff. But with Challenger and the fluctuations that happen on team, it's really hard to have that sort of roster lock aspect. So that's one of the biggest ways we learned. We actually expanded out so you no longer have to submit your roster the night before. You can play any of the players from your 9-player roster leading directly up into the match. So it gives that flexibility that Challenger teams really need. I think that's our biggest lesson learned so far.
So going into rules and regulations that you guys have made recently, some changes to the LCS for 2014 and all that, and in response to some of the things that we've seen, one of the big things is the visa situation. Yeah. So obviously a lot of discussion around Dexter, that kind of thing. There's actually a rule that says that in order to in order to play in the LCS, you have to be able to be work eligible in the US. First off, what kind of role does Riot play in obtaining these visas for players and teams, if any, and how much of the onus is on Riot versus the team to obtain these, that kind of thing? Yeah,
so in terms of visas, we really only give visa support for the teams that are actually in the LCS. And the big reason for that is there is a a huge amount of players outside of North America or Europe, for instance, that would want to come in and play, and being able to help them all with visa applications would be pretty untenable. So we actually restrict the visa assistance to specifically teams that are in the LCS. And then we actually have like some immigration lawyers that help us, and a lot of correspondence in-house at the Riot office too, back and forth, discussing and fighting for these people.
So are you guys obtaining the visas for the players, or is it the teams? And then, sort of, if it is the teams, what, I guess where's the line drawn? Like, what percentage of it is on you guys? How much of it is on the teams?
Most of it is on the lawyer. To be honest, like, they're the one that's doing a lot of the executing and groundwork to get these guys out. But the teams have to have constant correspondence. They need to fill out a lot of paperwork. They need to be on top of their stuff and in the back and forth conversation with not only the lawyers, but the government that they're trying to apply to. So it's really a team effort, but I think the lawyers do a lot of the helpful groundwork to ensure that these things go through.
Now, along those same lines, because you have to have the visa or at least be work eligible in the U.S. in order to participate, does that mean that right now, among all the different players that we see in the LCS, do they all have visas that allow them to do this?
That's a great question. And it's actually a discussion that happens a lot internally about spirit of the rule versus letter of the rule, or sorry, spirit of the law versus letter of the law. Right. Specifically, the idea behind the rule is we don't want teams to fly in to North America, play in the LCS, play their games, win their prize money, and then ship out.
Okay.
Right? So like coming in, reaping the benefits of the system, but not actually contributing in to what the system is trying to accomplish, whether it's like playing on the ranked fives ladder, it's living here, it's scrimming with the pro teams, scrimming with the challenger teams, like actually being a contributing force within the ecosystem of that region. So that's really why that rule is there. So in the spirit of that rule, we look to players that are giving their best effort to obtain these visas, and through that we sort of make a judgment call, like, is this realistic? Will this player actually be able to play in North America and legally live in North America at some point in the near future? And if that's the case, that's what we hold true to the rule. So it is a little bit of a discussion around like completely enforcing it versus what we actually invented the rule for, and that's the sort of the middle ground where we landed that achieves what we want to accomplish, but also prevents what we don't want to see.
Sure. So then I guess the implication there is that right now, not every player and participating in North American LCS has a visa lock-in yet. I mean, obviously we've seen like EG come in. Yeah. Dexter obviously now has one as he's coming in, but
yeah, I couldn't speak to the. To every single player, but right. it's damn near 100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Moving on, I'd love to talk to you a little bit about the fine recently, and I'm going to talk about European players. We saw Bjergsen get a fine from you guys of, I think, $2,000, correct, for player poaching.
Yeah.
A lot of people felt as though the fine was kind of a strange number. I don't think so many people had an issue with the fact that it occurred, but that maybe the number was too low. There was jokes about Bjergsen having to delay building a castle because TSM members are quite profitable from what I understand. So why did you guys arrive at, or how did you arrive at that specific number? And also, like a financial thing rather than maybe like a suspension from a game or a weekend or something like that.
Gotcha. A lot of discussion internally, and we thought a fine was appropriate based on the situation at hand. As for the exact number, I can't give the specific details on how we arrived at that, but a lot of our thought process is based on traditional sports and the way that they base their fines, which is generally speaking around minimum compensation of players, and not like outside sponsorships and outside revenue, which we actually don't know about on paper. So really, we looked at the minimum compensation and discussed a lot about the weight of the amount, and we ended up landing on 2,000.
Following that style of traditional sports, I believe that there's oftentimes a lot of discussion around whether or not these numbers in traditional sports for fines are big enough, because a lot of people feel sometimes that they're kind of a joke or whatever based on whatever the fine is or whatever. Why did you guys decide to follow the model of traditional sports in this situation? Do you find that that's still fine? Like those rules make sense there?
That is our best example of a system that works, and we take that as sort of a baseline in a lot of cases, and then sort of pivot and fluctuate as necessary. And so we saw that, and we added in our own perspective about how our league works, what our players make. at a baseline and sort of, used both to calculate out where we eventually landed.
Now, moving into this broad conversation around a lot of the rule changes that you guys have made and a lot of this discussion around Alliance, EG, NIP, Lemon Dogs, you have sort of instituted, starting with 2014, I believe in 2013, everybody was able to own one team per region. Is that correct? Organizations were allowed to have one team. You guys changed that in 2014, so you can only have one. Obviously, we saw this sort of situation happen with Alliance and EG, where now there's the team split, Alliance, EG. Alex Garfield, who was the owner previously of EG in Europe, now actually runs Good Game Agency, I believe is the name of his company, and now those brands have been licensed to different owners. First off, do you guys feel like that's an acceptable situation? A lot of people, specifically in the community, feel as though Alex Garfield still has a role in managing these teams despite not having ownership.
Gotcha. Well, in every sense of the term, Alex Garfield, or Good Game Agency, is a marketing agency. They have zero ownership over the teams that they are affiliated with. Okay. So when I say no ownership, I mean literally no control. We have like the recognized position within the league, which is general manager, which is given the responsibility of making all the decisions on the team, and is like the go-to person. Is like, what's the roster going to be? Mm-hmm. Like, who's on the team? Like all that stuff. And that is not Alex Garfield. Those are other people, and those people specifically control the teams like 100%. So to say that Alex Garfield is involved, well, he's not making the decisions based on how the league structure works. All right. And in every sense, it's an agency is marketing these teams and is using their name as a title sponsor. So
right around the time that the Lemon Dogs disqualification occurred from being in the LCS, there was a lot of discussion around maybe something similar happening with Lemon Dogs and NIP, or something where NIP was going to be taking Lemon Dog's spot. You guys made some rules changes around the purchasing of teams, which was something that we had seen again in this Alliance and EG situation, where the entire team, or a lot of the guys from EG, came over and substituted in for Velocity. I guess one of the bigger questions is, why did you guys decide to change the rules? Like, what was the decision behind changing the rules right around that NIP Lemon Dogs time? And why was that change not made around the time that we saw Alliance and EG make their moves?
Yeah, so in the EG situation, we saw what was going on. And at that point, we're like, is this healthy for the league? Is this good that this is happening? And we're sort of like in a middle ground. We're like, I'm not sure. So we'll see what's happening. We'll try to get more information, and we'll make a decision. In the end, we saw like these players move to North America and still had to compete and win a game to make it into the LCS, right? It wasn't like this auto berth where they just buy a spot and they're in. So that is the key difference between the situation between the EG players coming over and the Lemon Dogs NIP situation, where NIP wanted to buy Lemon Dog's spot directly out of the LCS. And so it's literally just like they get knocked out and they're back in. And that's at the point where we're like, hold on a second, like this is not appropriate, right. And this is not sending the right message for the league, and it's not the best thing for the health of the league. So at that point, based on like the experience that we'd had with EG and what we were seeing there versus what we were seeing in the Lemon Dogs NIP situation, is when we finally landed like, oh, okay, this is not okay, and we need to do something to stop that. And again, this sort of goes back to this broader idea of we're still learning and we're evolving, and there are so many intricacies with the way that these two leagues work together, and like the leagues from around the world, and then how we have challenger and teams moving up and down. And we are going to continue to learn and evolve and add and change rules. It's just something that will occur.
So along the same lines as what we saw with EG and Alliance, are there concerns, and maybe is this not concerning to you? The idea that perhaps we would see other owners try to find obviously Alex Garfield made that business move, this is just me saying this, because he felt it was more profitable or like the better move, right? Are there concerns at all, and would you guys be completely fine with us seeing a lot of the other owners, Hotshot GG, for example, on CLG, Reginald, TSM, Jack on Cloud9, seeking out deciding to create these other agencies, giving up ownership of their team and trying to step back so as to maybe be able to have a involvement or brand involvement on multiple teams across the two regions of NA and EU?
Would we be okay with it? I don't know. I would sort of need to see like how it unfolds, honestly. Right now we're okay with it, but if it becomes a situation where everyone is doing it, or or some other, or it goes a different direction, right, we would need to discuss and make decisions around that. But as it stands, we're okay with it. I'm not sure what that means for the future of other organizations wanting to move to this model, but in its current state, we're okay.
Do you think that there's a potential that this could happen? People will look at Garfield and say, or a Good Game Agency and say like, oh, maybe we should do this?
Very possible. They see that what they're doing and how they're accomplishing it, the road work and the like the legal jargon and all that's all paved, the road's paved for them. So it's really just fitting into a model that someone's already created. So it could happen. Other people could follow suit.
And I guess that's when you guys would start to re-examine again.
Well, I mean, it depends, right? I mean, we still constantly talk about it internally, like, what does this mean for the league as a whole, or both leagues, or like the global ecosystem? What does it look like if other people wanted to do this? And inevitably, they probably will. And so it's just a constant discussion that we have, and at a certain point, if it starts to hurt the integrity of the league, or like the health of teams and the way they work, or sponsorships in general, we'll step in. But for now, it seems like it's good, in a good place.
The international scene is also something I wanted to touch on. OGN, Kespa, Ace, or Lace, I'm not sure the pronunciation. These guys all sort of operate, and even the Garena leagues, all sort of operate within this League of Legends esports ecosystem. A lot of people see like you guys here in Riot in California operating NA and then EU LCSs. What kind of involvement do you guys have with these other organizations, and how do you work alongside them, if at all?
I mean, we don't have a lot to do with them. We definitely have conversations, but they are more focused on the local offices. So like Riot Korea speaks with OGN, and then Tencent with Lace and that sort of thing. So we don't have a lot of direct relationship with them. However, we do have conversations. We float ideas. The conversations are happening. It's just not a direct relationship like it would be with those local regions.
Do you guys have the ability to influence the rule set over there, or sort of change how that stuff works? I ask because in the AMA that you guys did at the start of the season, it was suggested that you guys were looking at the way that Korea has multiple teams, which obviously isn't allowed, as we were just discussing, in the North American EU LCS, and that was something that you guys were looking to possibly change. So do you guys have the ability to sort of change the rule sets over there and the way that those structures operate?
I mean, we're mainly focused on the NA and EU LCS, and specifically the rules and the policies that govern those two leagues is, of course, our closest league to our decision making. We do talk with those guys a lot and give them recommendations, and likewise they give us recommendations on rules. We're not coming in and be like, it needs to be this way, but we are having conversations and make recommendations, and it's more of a back and forth relationship.
One of the things that also has been discussed a lot in the community is with the fact that Korea has these like multiple teams in their organizations, and there's a concern that might actually somewhat be giving them an advantage, since NA and EU teams are restricted from having that. First off, do you think that that's really an issue at all, or do you think that gives them any advantage over the other two scenes, the Western scenes?
So when we implemented that rule, that was specifically for the health of the NA and EU LCS and the considerations around those two leagues. Not exactly sure what's the best for leagues outside of that. Okay. So we're very careful when we talk about the policies that we implemented in North America and Europe, and bringing those policies to other regions, especially regions like Korea who've been doing this for a long time. Sure. So we tread very carefully around that sort of thing. But again, it's constant conversations and getting their feedback, and again, back and forth and talking about what something like that would mean.
So then, sort of cycling back to the question before this, if you were to look at the fact that Korea can have these multiple teams, and you sort of come to the conclusion that, hey, maybe having these sister teams is actually giving these guys an advantage over the Western teams whenever it comes to World Championships, international tournaments, and you wanted to change that, would you be able to go to the organizations that run these systems and ask them to, and actually have them change the rule set to no longer have these multiple teams, or even rules that's an example of a rule there where you might see there's an issue and have to act in some way to get it changed?
That's not really the nature of the relationship. It's not so much about coming in and demanding change. That's not really a healthy way, especially when there's such a distinct difference between like the Korean esports ecosystem and the North American ecosystem. So it's not like we would go in and be like we would demand something like that. It's a conversation. And so to answer your question, again, it's a back and forth, and it's recommendations and advice both ways, and that's the nature of the relationship.
So 2 final questions as we're sort of wrapping up. The North American LOL esports, or I'm sorry, the LOL esports power rankings that have recently surfaced with different people from the casters to personalities in the community or whatever. You guys have started to publish, and they sort of highlight a situation that has been a long-standing conversation about North America's strength internationally. We see right now there is no North American team on there. I think Cloud9 was there the first week and they've dropped off. Do you guys feel as though North America's lack of strength internationally and in a lot of situations is at all an issue with the ecosystem or structure that we see in North America? And then if so, sorry for kind of the complex question, but if so, do you think that steps need to be taken to sort of resolve that?
So you are making an assumption a little bit that North America is the weakest region, right?
I didn't say that they are the weakest, because America is great. We would never be weak at anything. But I do think that, again, them not being on the LoL Esports Power Ranking shows that at the very least they are not as competitive as some of the other regions.
I think it's all opinion, and it's hard, right? Because like even the LPL league just started up like a few days ago, so it's assumptions and guesses based on like previous like match history, like success at Worlds and all that stuff. But I mean, the game is so different now than it was 3 months ago that I think those things aren't safe to assume. And I think we're still learning about regional strength. And every year we see regions move up and down, from Southeast Asia winning the World Championship to not going very far at the 2013 World Championship. Sure. So really, I think it's hard to say. And I don't really have a firm stance one way or the other. I think NA looks very strong this year. But again, it's hard to say.
Final question. We see in traditional sports a lot of sites, and like even a while back there was this whole idea in traditional sports of Moneyball, looking at like the strength of players based off of statistics and all that kind of thing. Obviously, we've seen some statistics show up on the LoL Esports website, and even we've seen places like Leaguepedia or other organizations take a look at just doing their own statistics. You guys also announced recently that there was going to be an API available. Riot Games as a whole, not just the esports team, announced that there was going to be an API available that would be able to get third parties some data from servers and that kind of thing. Is there the potential that we will see the esports team sort of work in a capacity to provide the API access to the tournament realms where LCS, even maybe other leagues are taking place, so that third-party sites such as OnGamers and others,
I haven't heard of them.
Great site. They would be able to sort of take a look at this data and perhaps provide great tools and options and analysis using that data via the API.
Yeah, I don't have too much information on the API. That isn't really my area.
Sure.
But I will say that we take security and the stability of those servers very seriously, and when you open it up, it can compromise some of those things. So really, our main focus again is security and making sure that thing is stable, and that the games happen efficiently and thoroughly. And we want to be very careful when we add in elements that could compromise that. Sure. So it is something that we discuss. But again, our main priorities are around security right now.
Finally, so if you guys were able to find a way to get the data to third parties without compromising the security of the tournament servers or anything like that, would that be something that you guys would be open to?
It is something that we discuss, and we think it would be really valuable. It's just not something we're ready to do right now, for the sake of making sure that like the integrity of the tournament realm specifically is maintained.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, hey, thank you so much, Nick, for this interview. Always a pleasure. Yes, exactly. Everyone, thank you for watching. You can check out the rest of our coverage of the LCS and more at ongamers.com.